Okay, Originals listeners, it's quiz time. Are you ready? So quick. Name a successful cinematographer who went on to become a successful movie director. It's a surprisingly short list, actually, and our guest is one. Did you guess Nicholas Roeg? The British director of Don't Look Now, the creepy horror film that's now most famous because Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland supposedly actually had sex while shooting their big love scene? Well, you would have been wrong. Nicholas Roeg's been dead for 2 years, and as such, probably would have been a disappointing guest. Now, this episode's guest is Barry Sonnenfeld, who is very much alive, living in Telluride with his wife, who he calls Sweetie. And as you'll soon find out, much like the departed Mr. Roeg, Sonnenfeld also had considerable experience shooting human beings engaged in, well, intimate acts on film. You know the cringy moment in any of those TV talent shows when, after like a Susan Boyle or a 5-year-old ventriloquist finishes their act and all the judges stand up and one of them announces, "This is what this competition is all about"? Well, I apologize in advance. This Barry Sonnenfeld interview is what The Originals is all about. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. As an interviewer for places like the New York Times and Vulture, I've interviewed way more celebrities than I care to admit. What I learned is a lot of stars don't really want to share much of themselves, so I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually have something to say. Some of them have great dish, others have a few axes to grind, a few actually even bring pathos as well as gossip. Director Barry Sonnenfeld brings an absolute smorgasbord of all of this, the 5th episode I've produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. Now, I love every interview I've done, but this one, I think I may love it the most. So a little biography. Barry Sonnenfeld grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and after film school, became one of the most sought-after cameramen in Hollywood. He started as the Caan brothers cinematographer, so Raising Arizona and Miller's Crossing, they look fantastic, right? Well, Barry Sonnenfeld shot those. From there, he went on to shoot movies like Big, When Harry Met Sally, and Misery, and then, in 1991, he made that rare transition and became a big-time director in his own right. He directed these huge franchise hits like the Addams Family and Men in Black movies, as well as the classic Get Shorty. More recently, he executive produced and directed more than half the episodes of Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events. A show, as you'll find out if you read his excellent recent memoir, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, felt autobiographical in a few too many ways. Barry Sonnenfeld, welcome to The Originals.
Thank you.
Barry, you know, from reading your memoir, it's obvious to me that you're a quirky guy. Blood Simple was the first movie that you shot, and it was in 1984. And this, I was really shocked to learn. Blood Simple, this was the first set that either you or the Caan brothers set foot on. So it was quite a beginning. Tell me, like, what are the quirks of the Caan brothers?
Well, you know, Joe and Ethan are sort of in many ways the same person. They both pace a lot. They both mumble. They don't show a great deal of enthusiasm. You know, we would do a take and Joe would say cut and Joe would say Eth and Ethan would go, yeah. And Joe would say, yeah, okay, moving on. In fact, I worked with Josh Brolin on Men in Black 3. He played young Tommy Lee Jones. And one of the things that was interesting is that Brolin told me that whenever he was doing a day on No Country for Old Men, Javier Bardem would come and visit the set and in reverse with Brolin and Javier when Javier was doing a scene, because Joel and Ethan never showed, you know, enough enthusiasm for their performance. So the other guy was there to cheer the other guy on. So Joe and Ethan are very sort of taciturn in terms of their enthusiasm. But
well, don't people say that about Woody as well, that you never get any emotion from him when you do that there's no sort of feedback? Do you give feedback?
Oh, yes. No. First of all, I direct from the camera. And I don't know how Joel and Ethan do it now, but most directors now direct from what's called Video Village. You know, there's a big video screen and people sit back there. And the problem is then you're removed from the actors. And right after a take, you know, they'll turn to the AD and say, tell them to do it again. Or stuff that's so unenthusiastic. Or they'll yell, yeah, no, you said that line wrong again. Which is not fair to the actors. I'm right next to the camera. So as soon as I say cut, I'm 18 inches from them and go, okay, you do this, let's do it again, but do this. But usually when I have a scene with two actors, I usually say cut, and then I go up to them and say, one of you is very good. And then, but let's do it again. And the one who wasn't very good, just do it better.
And one of your big directions I've heard is to make actors speak faster.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Oh, my favorite movies are screwball comedies. Preston Sturges movies like The Palm Beach Story or Sullivan's Travels. I love Howard Hawks comedies like Bringing Up Baby or His Girl Friday. And the actors talk so fast. See, the thing about comedies, and I've only directed comedies, is you want to pace the scene on the set and not in the cutting room. Cutting is the enemy of comedy. You never want to cut to a close-up for the punchline. So for me, by having the actors talk faster on the set, one is you're pacing that comedy on the set so you don't have to pace it up by cutting. And second of all, if actors talk quickly, it prevents them from being able to act. And the worst thing in the world...
Now this thing... Now, okay, I've heard you say this before. Is this a disrespect for an art? The art that they practice? If they're talking quickly, they don't have time to act.
Well, and that makes them seem realer and actually better acting. I mean, when I go to a movie, or even when my wife and I are sitting watching a TV show in our own home, Sweetie always has to sit next to me with her hand on top of my arm so I can't wave wildly and do windmills to speed up the performance. I always say, listen, I loved every moment of Breaking Bad. But I could have directed exactly those same 5 seasons without losing a line of dialogue in only 2 seasons.
Let's talk about other directors that you worked with. Penny Marshall. You were the cinematographer for Big, which was a big hit, which I was shocked. She wanted to have Robert De Niro play the Hanks role. But beyond that, tell me about Penny Marshall.
Let me say Penny wasn't necessarily wrong about that, because De Niro is an adult, and him playing a child might have been even funnier than Hanks, who's sort of kid-like, playing a child. It's less of a stretch for Hanks. So, in any case...
So you're saying you think it would have been a hit with De Niro?
I'm not saying it would have been a hit. I was saying it would have been a good movie.
Okay,
I'm not sure it would have been a hit, but... I went to NYU Graduate Film School, and what you learn in film school is you need to make decisions. Directing is only about decisions. I always say directing is about tone and consistency of tone, and you get consistency of tone by making thousands of decisions, and it's the accumulation of those decisions that create tone and style. Whether it's, do you want the gingham dress, or do you want her in a pantsuit? Or do you want to be in this location, or do you prefer the more modern house? So Penny hated to make decisions. And I had no problem making decisions. For instance, in the scene where Tom Hanks leaves a party with Elizabeth Perkins in a limo, the night we shot that scene, there were 3 Griffin Electric crews lighting a Subaru XT because Penny liked the dashboard on that car, a Corvette convertible because Penny thought it would be cool that Tom and Elizabeth would be in a Corvette, and the limo. Because even though it was 10 weeks into the show, Penny still couldn't make a decision about which vehicle the lead actors were in. So we literally had 3 different IA Griffin Electric crews at great expense at night, rigging 3 different cars. And then we got to the set, and Bobby Greenhut said, who is a line producer, what's it going to be, Penn? The Corvette, the limo, or that other thing? Because he didn't know what a Subaru XT was. And Penny said, what does Barry think? And I said, the limo. And she said, okay, it's a limo, but remember I said it was a bad idea, because she would mumble. So I said, no, Penn, if it's a bad idea, you should pick the car you want. I'm just trying to help. No.
So Barry, we
can
can look at this two ways. Either Penny Marshall was sort of a genius that needed to sort of decide at the moment, and she had to have all these options, or she was pathological and not cut out for directing movies.
I think both are equally true. She was not cut out for directing movies, and she was genius as a comedy director. You know, it was her idea to have Tom eat the caviar because she knew he could make a meal out of that, as it were, a comic meal. It was her idea to have those little baby corns, which Tom,
That's the thing that is the one, probably the most memorable thing from that movie is him eating that little tiny baby corn.
That's right. So Penny was a comic genius. She just was a very depressed person who didn't want to make decisions, but had great ideas. And I don't begrudge her success at all. She chain smoked and she had the worst diet. She would only eat burgers and fried chicken. You know, she was not a healthy person. But you know what? To each their own. You know, I swear, to each their own. And she was really funny. She was talented in knowing where the comedy was. She just was a very depressed person. And I'm a depressed person, but when I'm on the set, I'm alive and I pretend I'm not depressed.
Yeah.
And you got to act, you know, and Penny was an actor, but just was sort of self-indulgent in her depression.
How about Rob Reiner? You shot When Harry Met Sally, which is 1989, and then Misery, which was 1990. How's Rob?
Rob's fantastic. We're still incredibly good friends. I introduced Rob to his wife, Michelle. They got married a month after we did, and they're still married. They have 3 kids, and so Sweetie and Rob and Michelle have both been married for 31 years, and he's great. And we would laugh. And I remember I was worried about Jimmy Caan on Misery. The very first scene, Jimmy is finishing the last page of his book. He opens up a bottle of Dom Perignon and lights a cigarette.
I love that scene.
And literally, he could not get a match lit. I would say 30, 40 takes. He couldn't light this match, and he was shaking. And
does he naturally have a palsy? Is he nervous? What's going on?
No, he's overly energetic, let's say. In fact, he was the worst actor you could hire to lay in a bed for 80 pages because he couldn't sit still. So we broke for lunch, and I went to Rob's camper, and I said, "Hey, Rob, remember Vietnam?" Which meant get out now, fire him. It's day one. You don't want to be with this guy for 60 more days.
Had you been the director, would you have fired him? Would you have gone with a different actor?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I would have known it was going to be really tough to get through a whole movie with Jimmy. In fact, you know.
So I guess it was very tough to get through a whole movie with James Caan.
It was. I mean, and this is the level of disdain. And I'm just the cameraman. I'm not the director, but Jimmy's lying in bed, and the shot is he gets out of bed, Kathy Bates is in town, and he tries to crawl across the floor because his leg's broken to get out of this bedroom, because he knows at this point that she's insane. So Jimmy's on the floor, and we're ready to roll, and the camera's underhung, which means it's very close to the floor, and Jimmy says, "Hey, Rob, how far should I crawl?" And Rob says, "Hey, Barry, how far should Jimmy crawl?" And I literally go, and I spit on the floor. And Rob says, "Crawl to the loogie, Jimmy." So neither Rob
now,
or
does this reflect your? So is this an expression of how you're feeling about James Caan at this point? Is that what I'm to read?
I would say it might be, yeah.
All right.
But Rob was right there with me. Rob didn't say, "Barry, you can't do that to our actor." Jimmy was lovely. He's very funny. You know, he was a cowboy. He's Jewish and was a rodeo star. Really interesting guy, but should not be the guy that's lying on the bed for 80 pages.
Yeah. What did he do? Would he just bitch?
No. He's always shaking and moving his legs and stuff like that. And Kathy Bates is such a great actress that she makes him look good. You just cut to him doing nothing and he looks scared because Kathy is so frightening. So Kathy sort of created Jimmy's performance in that movie.
Well, Barry, let me put you. Let's pretend this is an alternate universe. Say that you were the director and Rob Reiner was the cinematographer. You fired James Caan. Who gets in the bed? Who's it going to be? Who are you putting in there? Any actor.
I'm going to say Richard Dreyfuss. He seems more like he seems like a writer. Jimmy Caan doesn't seem like a writer.
Interesting, Richard Dreyfuss. Because he seems like this guy seems like a very energetic person too, and he had his, he obviously had his cocaine years. Let's hope it wasn't his cocaine years, because sitting in that bed would have been torture for him. But I always think of him as an energetic person too. Interesting choice.
Well, I'm spitballing
I'm putting Harrison.
here.
I'm putting Harrison Ford in my bed. All right.
You know what? You're going to make money doing that, but Harrison doesn't seem like a writer to me, and he doesn't seem like someone who is going to be cowed by Kathy Bates. You want someone who's a little frailer and more intellectual than physical.
Okay. All right. I want to put some thought on that, but it's interesting you mention James Caan, because I wanted to. You have directed people who I would imagine if I showed up and had to direct them, I would be scared to death of. They all have their own kind of reputations. You did Gene Hackman in Get Shorty. You did Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black. What, 3 of them? And then Rip Torn in 2 of them. All of these people to me seem like fearsome, like probably would be difficult to discipline, would be difficult, and I would be sort of afraid of hiring them because I would think that they might run over me. Is that not the case? Have I got it wrong?
Because they're professional, they can be ornery, they can be angry, they can be incredibly scary, but they also are actors that believe that they are working with or for a director. Which one's the scariest? Robin Williams.
Wait, Robin Williams is the scariest?
Yeah. I would say Robin Williams, then Gene Hackman, then Tommy. Robin was hard because my whole thing is control, it's pre-production, it's getting the script right and kind of sticking to the script for the most part. And Robin is a jazz musician who is all about improv. That can work sometimes, but not always. And when you're working with kids who are waiting to hear a certain line of dialogue because they've memorized that line means they come in with their line. If you're riffing and doing improv, the kids never know where to come in. So I asked Robin to stick to the script, at least for the first few takes, and then he could improv, but he didn't enjoy the experience, and he was pretty mean about it.
To who?
So, me.
To you.
So,
did he
to
call,
the only
call
one who
names?
matters, me.
Did he shout at you?
Yes. But
did he throw anything?
No, but I will also say in his defense, after the show, he went back into the program and apologized to me because it turns out that he was depressed and on drugs during most of the shooting of that show, according to him.
It was 2006, is that right?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, 2006.
Yeah.
This was 8 years before he died. You'd see him on talk shows, and I never thought, probably as a youngster, I never thought it was drugs. It may have been drugs, but there seemed something so sad about the kind of constant sort of riffing. Was there something kind of desperate about it?
Well, I've worked with 2 people like that. One was Robin, and the other is Tim Allen. Both were incredibly funny. And the thing about both Robin and Tim is being alone with them. You've never met anyone more fascinating, more educated. Both Robin and Tim knew everything about geology, astronomy, religion. You couldn't throw anything at them. I mean, Robin knew we shot that RV in British Columbia, and he knew the premier, he knew more about Canadian politics than Canadians did. And Tim was exactly the same way. And being with either one of them alone was a treat. But then the waiter comes and it's showtime, because now there's 3 people instead of 2. And I'll tell you, I came back to Vancouver a decade later to do a series of unfortunate events. And I went to this restaurant called Chin Chin. And the manager came up to me and said, today was my day off, but I saw that your name was on our reservation list. And I had to come in and talk to you because I want you to know that a decade ago, I was your waiter the night you and Robin came in to have dinner here. And not only me, but anyone who was at the restaurant that night had years of PSTD before we ever recovered. And because literally Robin was great.
He's not shouting at this. He's not abusive. Is he just because he's over entertaining? What is he doing?
Yeah, no, he's standing up. He's leaving my table. He's sitting at he's doing an hour of Don Rickles. So you over there with the red hair, what color, literally an hour of stuff. Hey, Robin, we got an early call tomorrow. Come back and let's order our food.
And so was Tim the same way?
Yeah, Tim was the same way. Alone with him, fascinating guy, really interesting. But then you go out to dinner or you're with the whole crew, and then it's showtime. It's entertainment time. To the point where if we had a scene, we were shooting coverage and Tim was off camera, I wouldn't bring Tim back onto the set to read his off-camera lines. I'd have the script supervisor read it. Same with Robin, because they have such a need to entertain that it becomes disruptive and not helpful to get through the day. Both incredibly talented, incredibly funny, but just needing to be loved all the time. And it just gets old at some point. But both of them were good in the movies I directed them in.
Sonnenfeld's first legitimate cinematography gig might have been Blood Simple with the Coen brothers. But after graduating from NYU Film School, Sonnenfeld bought a camera, went into business, and made himself available for a variety of different kinds of film projects. Excellent. So, okay, now you have talked about this at length about doing... Let's see, how many is it? Is it 9 shooting 9 feature-length pornos in 9 days in 1979? This was one of your first professional gigs. I don't want to talk about it. I read it. I still don't want to watch porn. I think that there's a lot of people who probably listen to this who like to watch porn. We're not going to talk about what was shot out on you and what caused you to vomit on the set. I just think we have to avoid it. There are a couple of things, however, I do want to ask you.
You don't want to ask. First, you don't want to ask me about warm, loamy, foamy human excrement covering my body. Okay, fine.
No. I mean, I read honestly. I'm not gonna cop to being like a porn lover, but you spend a lot of time in your book, and I highly suggest people buy the book, and I highly suggest if you like pornography to skip this particular chapter. But you describe in great detail the movement. And you're very close up. The movement of a hemorrhoid on a woman who was engaged in a double penetration scene. And that was just enough for me. It was enough. I love the book. I don't need to hear about that, but I do want to ask you one thing.
Yep.
You worked in those 9 days with Ron Jeremy. And the one thing that everybody thinks about Ron Jeremy, besides the fact that he's now in jail for sexually assaulting a number of women, the one thing that the man initially got famous for being able to fillet himself.
That's correct.
Now, you had a theory, which it just never occurred to me, that maybe it wasn't necessarily, and I don't know if you actually even sort of verbalized the theory in your book, that maybe it wasn't the length of his penis.
His short torso.
Tell me about this.
Well, I have to be honest with you. The scene that we filmed of Ron Jeremy giving himself a blowjob was a scene that I was not there to watch because I was downstairs on 17th and 5th letting the April 1st rain wash the human excrement from the previous scene off of my body. So
there you go, Barry. I asked you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm not describing how it happened, but in any case, I was not there because I was throwing up and washing off some horrible stuff off of my body in a spring rainstorm. But what's funny is when I came back, the other cameraman, who had no problem with the double penetration scene, was vomiting because he was an arch Catholic and couldn't deal with someone giving themselves a blowjob. So there's a lot of vomiting on that set. It was truly horrific. I will say that if anyone who likes porn visited a porn set, they would never have any interest in porn again. Let's just leave it at that.
You know, I'm telling myself after reading your chapter that that your porn shoot was exceptional, and all the rest of them smell like vanilla candles,
right,
and everybody's enjoying themselves. Your 9 films were exceptional. The rest of them are all real and very hot. Okay.
Well, yes. Why don't you keep that as a lovely construct in your brain?
After reading Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, it seems to me that you are a man who takes great pride in your various neuroses. That you've actually had sort of a running kind of competition with Larry David to see who is the more neurotic. You apparently, according to some, have won. Now, pretend this is like a job interview, but instead of describing your most capable traits, give me a few instances. Tell me why you're so neurotic. Can you tell me?
Well, the reason I'm so neurotic is because of my
mother.
No.
Well, we're going to talk about your mother, but tell me the neuroses.
Oh, well, fear of all medical diseases. I never get to an airport less than 3 or 4 hours early. And I mean, I shouldn't say get to an airport. I mean, get through security and sitting, in the lounge waiting for the plane. In fact, when I used to fly a lot between New York and LA, I would get to JFK, for my 3 o'clock flight, and I would check in, and the check-in counter would say, this is my 3 o'clock flight. They would say, you probably can make the 10 a.m. flight. I go, yeah, but the 10 a.m. flight is in 2 hours. That's a little tight getting...
Barry, what do you do for 4 hours? What are you doing for 4 hours at the airport?
Well, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you. The same exact thing I would be doing at home those 4 hours, which is sitting with an iPad Pro, checking Flipbook, reading the New York Times, reading a book. So why not have any fear about getting 3 flat tires and being in the worst traffic jam ever? Why not get to that airport so you're reading the same stories, the same iPad, but there are no worries because you're at the airport. So I always say to my wife, look, you could be doing the same thing right now at the airport and not worry. And she says, I'm not worried. Well, you should be, sweetie. We might get 3 flat tires on the way to the airport. And she goes, okay, I'll go with you. And then we're at the lounge, and I go, how much fun is this?
So this habit actually is a lot actually easier to take than what I gather was a real issue with spontaneous vomiting. And now, do you still vomit a lot when you're nervous?
No, now I have sciatica. You figure out new ways to sort of express your neurosis. At some point, your brain realizes that it's psychosomatic, so you have to move on to a different part of your body.
Yeah.
I went from vomiting to terrible back and neck pain, and I got rid of the neck pain and kind of the back pain, but now I have profound sciatica. Like, I once had it cured, and then I went to the local cheese shop in Telluride, where the woman is lovely, the cheeses are great, but she drives me crazy in the speed or lack of speed of wrapping each piece of cheese, and I'm always holding out my hand saying, just put it on my hands. I'll take it right on my... And literally, I went from being cured to laying down on this woman's store's floor in writhing pain It's about control. I need to be in control of everything because my mother was so out of control. I had to fight that tooth and nail. So
I have a plot for this. I want to talk to you. Maybe we should get to your mother now, but let's not talk about your mother. We're going to talk about her later. But so I was stunned. According to you, and I'm just wondering when there was actually time to shoot this movie. You write that you threw up 18 times in 42 days on the set of Blood Simple.
Yeah.
So
right.
were you a proficient puker? Were you able to do it quickly so it didn't sort of get in the way of people's day and people's shots? Or were you guys just closing down every 3 hours so you could throw up?
In most instances, I threw up on the way to set or after looking at dailies, just because I was so nervous. There was only one time I threw up on the set, and that's because I was filming Danny Hedaya doing a vomit scene. You know, we had a tube in his mouth and it would send succotash into his mouth, and then he would vomit in front of the lens. And I call myself a sympathetic vomiter. If I see, hear, or smell vomit, I'm there. So as soon as Danny got done fake vomiting, I leaned away from the camera and I threw up. In fact, when we did the take 2, Joel Cohen said to the boom operator, Peter Kurland, Mike Barry, because his vomiting is real vomiting. So that's my vomiting that you hear in Blood Simple over Danny Hedaya's image of vomiting. So you're welcome.
Just in case you're interested, here is said scene with Dan Hedaya vomiting. Sounds courtesy of Barry Sonnenfeld. You know, let's talk about your mother. You did on the set of Men in Black. You said, and it was reported by the press, and you had no issue with it being reported, that you offered $400,000 for anybody who would kill your mother.
Kill my mother or get me fired off the movie. A reporter for Newsweek was following me around for a few days because Newsweek had seen an early cut and thought Men in Black was going to be a big hit. We were totally under the radar that season. We were not going to be the biggest movie of the year. But Newsweek saw an early cut and wanted to do. In fact, we had a cover story. Will and Tommy are on the cover of Newsweek, and it's a rave review. And this reporter wrote that Barry Sonnenfeld, who's a bit of a neurotic, would walk around the set saying to anyone who would listen to him whine that he would give anyone $400,000 to either kill his mother or get him fired off the movie. So Mom reads this in Newsweek. It comes out, cover story. She calls me and says, "Do you really wish I were dead?" And I said, "Mom, I promise you, I would never pay anyone $400,000 to kill you." And she said, "Thank you, Barry. I love you too," through her tears. So I didn't say I didn't want her dead, but I did say, so I wasn't lying. I just said I wouldn't pay anyone $400,000 to kill her.
Now, is this shtick? Because I want to, in a moment, I want you to read a little bit of your book. Is this, I mean, had your mother been run over by a truck at any point? Had your mother followed through on her promises to kill herself? Would it have been the kind of trauma that most of us would associate with the death of a mother?
None.
Now, as you'll probably guess from listening to Barry Sonnenfeld for even a few minutes, the guy is hilarious. And his book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, is a really funny show business memoir. At least 90% of it is. But then there's this other 10% about his upbringing that will totally stop you in your tracks. It's harrowing, as you'll hear from this excerpt about his childhood I asked him to read.
I was 5 years old and fast asleep when my father gently shook me awake. "Scoot over." I rubbed my eyes. "Barry, your mother is very sad right now. She says she doesn't want to live anymore. She loves you very much, and you should talk to her. Convince her that she shouldn't kill herself." "What?" I walked into the living room. I was wearing red pajamas printed with firemen. I brought my coin jar with me. Mom, sitting on the couch, was surrounded by used damp tissues. Her eyes were red, her bloated face streaked with tears. "Mom?" Barry, I want to die. Please don't say that, Mom. Barry, I'm not happy. I don't want to live. Your father and you should let me die. I'm just not happy. I want to kill myself. Just let me die, Barry. Mommy, please don't do that. Please. I held out my coin jar. You can have all this money. It's yours. Just don't do that. I mean, really? Who the fuck does this? To a 5-year-old? I now suspect 60 years later is that earlier in the evening, either my father had announced he was leaving her and she went right to 11, or that Kelly had just had it with my father's affairs. I'll never know for sure what brought on my mother's night of hell, but there was little Barry right in the middle of it. I had been pulled into a vicious triangle that my parents desperately tried to keep intact for the rest of their lives. The next morning, my father and mother treated the previous evening as if nothing had ever happened.
I read that passage with much sadness, and I think my first reaction was probably the reaction that you have, that you're right in the middle of it. Who the hell would say this? A 5-year-old. 2 adults! A 5-year-old! Not one of them says this is not right. What is this?
In 2 words, 2 narcissists. It was always about them, or each individually. It was about each. My mother was a narcissist. My father was a narcissist. And it was rarely about me, which was fine. You know, unfortunately, I was an only child. I begged my parents throughout their lives to tell me I was adopted. I said, it's okay. Tell me. I beg you. Let me have none of your genetic input. Please, I beg you.
Well, the interesting thing is you're not alienated from these people. You actually had relationships. You threw your father a 90th birthday party. And I've yet to actually even mention Cousin Mike is somebody that, well, you tell me. You tell me about Cousin Mike. Because it's just, I don't even want to say it myself. You tell me.
Well, so early in the book, I talk about reading this piece on the internet written by my best friend growing up in Washington Heights about him being molested as a child. And I emailed him and I said, was it CM the CM? And he said yes, CM the CM being Cousin Mike the child molester. We met for breakfast.
Tell me who CM. So this actually is a relative.
Yes, Mike Lawrence was my mother's first cousin. And for 2 years, he lived on our couch with my parents knowing he was a child molester. You know, at like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Jewish holidays and stuff, when all the young cousins were at my apartment, Mike would have someone sit on his lap and unzip their zipper, and my parents would go, Mike! And then Mike would take his hand out of their zipper. But he was a obvious and known child molester. So I had breakfast with this friend of mine from Washington Heights, and he told me that his life had been ruined by it. Sexually, multiple marriages, strange issues. And I went to see my father, who was about 93 at the time. I went up to the Upper West Side where he lived with his girlfriend.
And this was what? This was, I think, fairly recently, no?
Yeah, a couple of years before I wrote the book, you know, in the 2000s, you know, about 6 years ago. And I said to my father, did you hate Mom so much that you let a child molester live with us just so Mom would have someone to hang out with? And Dad said 3 things. He said, first of all, Barry, remember, child molestation didn't have the same stigma back then that it has now. So that makes your ears ring a bit. And then he said, second of all, your mother was so upset by all the affairs I was having that I thought it would just cheer her up to have Mike around. And third of all, I never knew Mike molested you. I only thought he was playing with your penis. Which, you know, that's tilt, game over, you know, leave. So I said, and that was okay with you? And Dad said, well, I play with my penis. It feels good. Don't you play with yours? And I said, Dad, but there's no one forcing themselves on your penis. And Dad said, I never thought of it that way. And I said, all right, I have to leave. So I left. But here's the thing. I'm pretty mean to my parents.
Wait. No, we're not going to, because eventually you let your parents off the hook in the book a little bit. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this. I want to say you were not, I think you can tell if you're listening to your accent, you were not born in Appalachia with people with no teeth. This was like an Upper West Side Jewish family. Your mother was a public school teacher. These were not hillbillies. Right. What is that?
They were narcissists.
Am I missing something?
They were narcissists. It's that simple. They just, whatever they needed to do to make their lives livable. And in my father's case, it was having lots of... I once said to my father, hey, Dad, why did you marry Mom? And Dad said, I have no idea. So that was his relationship with my mother. And my mother was a very self-indulgent, self-needy narcissist, and they knew I was being molested, but Mike would drive Mom to the Paramus Park Mall and go antiquing with her up in, Beacon, New York. And so they kept him around.
Okay, so what's interesting to me is that all through this interview, you've said that my neurosis and all these problems are owing to my mother. How about Cousin Mike, the child molester? How do you think that it ruined your best friend's life? What did it do to you?
I think I'm pretty okay. I'm sure there are layers of pain that I have. It may be why I have sciatica and have such a need to be in control of everything, because I didn't have any control growing up and was surrounded by a mother who was out of control and was being molested by this man. Maybe that's why when I take my dog for a walk, and I want to get back and he hasn't pooped yet and I can't control him pooping, that I get excruciating sciatica. Maybe it's why I need to get to the airport 4 hours early to make sure that no one is going to prevent me from getting on that plane because they missed a turn or had 3 flat tires. I don't know.
Honestly, we can insult our own mothers, and I think this is an extreme case. You include a photo of your mother, and it's captioned, "Kelly also had a Roger Ebert thing going on." And there is a picture of your mother, and I'm just going to say it. Your mother looks just like Roger Ebert.
That's right. Or on Letterman, I said that until he died, my mother could have been Vincent Gardenia's photo double, which also elicited great laughter. I didn't know, they knew I was going to say that in the pre-interview, but I didn't know that Dave would have a photo of Vincent Gardenia. So he shows the camera the photo of Vincent Gardenia, which gets a huge laugh, and I look at the photo and I go, well, Mom had more facial hair.
I want to play a little clip from Barry Sonnenfeld's first movie. It's 1991's The Addams Family. In this, you're going to hear, after the Addams family has fallen on hard times, Morticia, played by Angelica Houston, has to take a job as a nursery school teacher.
And so the witch lured Hansel and Gretel into the candy house by promising them more sweets. And she told them to look in the oven. And she was about to push them in, when lo and behold, Hansel pushed the poor, defenseless witch into the oven instead, where she was burned alive, writhing in agony. Now, boys and girls, what do you think that feels like?
Okay, one little note. You may appreciate knowing that in order to get these kids to cry on camera, Barry Sonnenfeld informed them that they'd all soon be getting shots. I'm 100% serious. He writes it wasn't his proudest moment and actually nearly earned him a beatdown from one of the angry dads. So, right out of the gate, you do Addams Family. Modest expectations. They say the first weekend it's going to do $12 million. The thing opens at $24 million. It's a hilarious movie. It's, a much beloved classic now. All of a sudden, you're off to the races, right? What was that like, having a weekend like that?
Well, because I am my mother's son, I can't really enjoy that success. I'm not good at accepting compliments or anything like that. So whenever people would call me, I would say, oh, thanks very much, but really it wasn't really my film. I mean, I would have liked it even if it was not successful. You really should tell that the marketing people and the distribution people did a great job, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, Scott Rudin called me late Sunday night to congratulate me, and I said, well, you really should congratulate, marketing and distribution. And Rudin said, Barry, if you can't be happy tonight, your mother won. And as soon as I heard that, I realized, oh, Jesus, I better really enjoy this because otherwise Mom won.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about Rudin. I don't know if you would be in the position you are had he not called you. Do you think you would have?
I have no idea. I was not looking to be a director. I was very happy as a cameraman, and Rudin just sent me the script and said, have a meeting with me. I want you to direct Addams Family. So I might still be the Coens cameraman.
So here's a clip from 1995's Get Shorty, which was based on the Elmore Leonard book. In this scene, we hear John Travolta, who plays a loan shark who aspires to become a movie producer, explaining to Delroy Lindo, who plays a drug dealer who also wants to become a movie producer, how he intends to enlist an A-list actor to sign up for his film project.
Barry called you his associate. What does that mean? Man, I never heard your name or read it in a Hollywood Reporter or Variety or any place.
It's what he said. I'm his associate.
You must bring something heavy to the deal.
I do. Me.
It says here you're getting Martin Weir for the part of Lovejoy.
That's right. We're getting Martin.
Come on. How are you going to do that?
I'm going to take a gun. I'm going to put it to his head. And I'm going to say, sign the fucking papers, Martin, or you're dead. That's it.
I wonder, would that work?
Anyway, they don't make a lot of inside Hollywood movies because they generally don't make money. And that's what makes Get Shorty so special. But I'm watching the movie, which is about Chili Palmer, who's kind of a low-level gangster played by John Travolta, who uses his charm and his knowledge of the streets to basically rise to great heights as a producer. And it got me thinking about producers. And you've worked with a lot of very interesting producers. The first one, Scott Rudin. I think a lot of people in Los Angeles know about Scott Rudin. He's New York based, right?
Yes.
I think his reputation, I always thought about Scott Rudin as being the guy that has Harvey's temper, but is gay and, at least as far as I know, doesn't rape people. But he was a guy who had a reputation as being volcanic. Did you ever see this?
Yes, I saw a lot of volcanoes erupting from Scott. The other thing that's different between Harvey and Scott is Scott has fantastic taste and is really a creative genius. Listen, I think Scott is the greatest producer. He's, volcanic, he's impatient, but he's also supportive. But he would scream at me all the time. But I discovered the secret with Scott was to out-juvenile him. So when he would...
So what'd you do?
Well, when I was in his office, when he would start to scream at me, and usually Paul Rudnick, who's the uncredited rewriter of Addams Family, the three of us would be in his office and I would disagree about something and he would start screaming at me and I would take all the pillows off of his couch and build a couch fort and crawl into the fort and close up the last pillow and yell, I can't hear you, I'm in the fort. And what was great is Scott would scream at me, but he would scream, get out of the fort. Sonnenfeld, get out of the fort. He would never say, there is no fort, you schmuck. Get out. I'd say, I can't hear you. If you apologize, I can hear you. And finally, you would say, all right, I'm sorry, get out of the fort. And then I would get out of the, quote, fort. Would you guys be like smiling at this point? Or was there like a legitimate kind of fight going on with you in a childlike pillow fort? There was no smiling from him about the fort. He took the fort as seriously as if he were an 8-year-old. Because he never picked up a pillow and said, schmuck, there's no fort. There's a bunch of pillows that you're hiding underneath. This is stupid. He obeyed the sanctity of the fort. So then I'd get out of the fort and we would continue as if nothing happened.
So there's this famous story that Kevin Smith once told on a college stage many years ago about meeting with the producer John Peters. John Peters got his start as a hairdresser and then parlayed his romance with Barbra Streisand into this long, very successful career as a Hollywood producer. You probably heard about John Peters recently because earlier this year he married Pamela Anderson and it lasted for all of 12 days. Anyway, back in the 90s, John Peters summoned Kevin Smith to his mansion to discuss writing a script for a film that was going to be called The Death of Superman. Sean Penn or Nicolas Cage was going to star as Superman, but John Peters had some very specific directions of what he wanted Kevin Smith to put in the script.
He's like, I got some directives for you if you're going to move forward on the process. Some things I want you to do and don't in the script. He's going, 3 things. Okay, I said, all right. So 1, I don't want to see him in that suit. 2, I don't want to see him fly. And 3, he's got to fight a giant spider in the 3rd act.
Kevin Smith ultimately got fired from this job. Death of Superman never got made. But Kevin Smith did add this postscript that involved Sonnenfeld's 1999 film, Wild Wild West. And if you've heard of the movie, it's probably because it was sort of a critical disaster. Everybody hated it, and everybody who was involved with it, I think, probably regretted it. But I actually saw it recently, not nearly as bad as advertised.
And it was just fun. Like, I got to work on Superman. I got incredible access into the DC archives and shit like that. And people would give me free Superman shit all the time because I was working on it. And then I got shit canned off and I started throwing Superman stuff away because who needs to be reminded? But I was really reminded the next summer when I went to the movies and saw a movie that John Peters had produced. And it was called The Wild Wild West. So I'm sitting in the theater watching the movie, and then all of a sudden, like a giant fucking spider shows up.
So I needed to know, was the giant spider in the 3rd act of Wild Wild West John Peters' idea?
I have no idea. When I came on, there had already been many scripts written, and we did more scripts, but the spider was already in it. But it's very possible. I mean, for me, that version of the story is that John insisted there be a scene where Will Smith was in drag. And I said, it just doesn't work. It's going to ruin the movie. It takes away any tension. Will won't feel comfortable doing it. I don't want to do it. And John insisted. But that's John. He gets an idea for a scene. It's not about structure. It's not about character. It's not about storytelling. It's, wouldn't it be cool if Will Smith was in drag? And that scene is horrible. It's in the movie. I so tried to not have that scene be even in the script. Or telling Kevin Smith there's got to be a spider. That's John. He thinks about scenes and posters and commercials and marketing, and that is definitely one way to be a producer. It's not the best way, but it is a way, and
but he actually, I mean, he had a string. I mean, you look at his credits: Caddyshack, the Batman movies, Rain Man. I mean, how do you attribute success to somebody who seems to have all these bad ideas about what to put in movies?
Well, how did Trump get to be president? I mean, my point is, horrible things happen, you know? I mean...
So John Peters, is John Peters Hollywood's answer to... Is it sort of a failing upward kind of thing? I mean, obviously, he must have some charm. He must have had some charm, right, to get this stuff made. Did he have the Chili Palmer street sense after all those years, in the salon?
You know, once you get those successes, success gets you more success. So once he was successful with Barbara, then he would start to get other scripts because he became an important producer at Warner Brothers. So success brings on more success. And I never enjoyed the experience of working with John. John was also a screamer, but didn't have the taste and chops to back it up.
Well, what's interesting about Wild Wild West, and I watched it with my kids who actually quite enjoyed it. I want to talk a little bit about Wild Wild West because it has this kind of like mythic status. But, now that you mention it, it was very interesting that not only does you have two leading men in drag. You have Kevin Kline starting in drag, and then I mean, did you make this point to him that, like, you know, it's maybe sort of too clever by half, or just too much?
Too dumb by twice, more than too clever by half. The Kevin Kline drag scene is actually quite good, and Kevin did a really good job in that scene. There were several big problems with that movie. The biggest one is you only want one funny guy in your comedy. You need George Burns and Gracie Allen. You need Abbott and Costello. You don't want Robin Williams and Tim Allen. You know what I mean? So Will was supposed to be the funny one, and Kevin, until a certain point, it was going to be George Clooney in the Artemis role.
Really?
And then Clooney dropped out. We got Kevin, and there were 4 problems. One is Kevin felt he was slumming it and was doing it for the money because it wasn't like serious acting. 2, he wanted to be funny. And Will was supposed to be funny. And after the first day of shooting, and Will and I had already done Men in Black, I went to Will's camper, and I said, "Guess what, Will?" And he said, "Yeah, I know. I can't be the funny one because Kevin refuses to be the straight man, so I'll be the straight man." And I said, "Yeah." Third of all, there was absolutely no chemistry between Will and Kevin, and it's a buddy movie. The other thing, we had Kenneth Branagh playing the villain. Kevin Kline thinks he's the greatest Shakespearean actor. Kenneth Branagh may be the greatest living Shakespearean actor. So Kevin Kline had such jealousy that whenever he walked on a set, this is true, and Kenneth Branagh was there, as Kevin Kline would walk on the set, Kevin Kline would be saying, "A rose by any other name." He just needed us to know that he was a better Shakespearean actor.
Wait, he would actually, I didn't know it was going to be that on the nose. He would actually do Shakespeare as Branagh comes on the set?
Yes.
And it was this was not sort of tongue-in-cheek. This was not like his sort of gag.
No. We were on the set one day, you know, the whole platform of the spider, there's this like 60-foot mechanical spider. So we built a platform with gimbals so we could articulate it and make people move around. But we're shooting it on blue screen. So you're really, 10 feet off the ground. But when we add background to it, it will seem much higher. And Kevin says, "Hey," Will called me Baz, so Kevin would call me Baz. "Hey, Baz, how high off the ground are we?" And I'd say, 40 feet. And Kevin would say, "I thought it was more like 70 feet. And I said, "Okay, 70 feet. And instead of that being the end of it, Kevin would say, "No, but you said 40. So what makes you think it's 40 and not 70? And I go, "Okay, give me 2 takes. Give me a take where you're acting as if you're going to fall from a height of 40 feet and one where it's 70 feet so I can see the difference." Meanwhile, Will Smith is saying, "Baz, don't engage. Move on. Don't engage. Just say roll camera." Because Kevin would have these insane discussions.
Well, Kevin Kline is a great actor. Is this possibly your experience? Is this why we didn't see more Kevin Kline movies?
No.
Do you think that, did he?
I think Kevin is a great actor, and I think he's also a great comedy actor. I think this was a one-off bad movie.
That weekend after the Addams Family came out, which, for most people would have been the greatest day of their lives. I don't know if you had the feeling like, what's it going to feel like when the other shoe drops? But like Wild Wild West, when it came out in 1999, toys were made. You can buy toys on eBay. They'd been promoting it for a full year before it came out. And then this kind of drumbeat of press, the same kind of press that came out about like movies like Waterworld, but also the same kind of press that came out about movies like Dances with Wolves and Titanic. Like, all this press started coming out saying that it was troubled, that the test screenings weren't good. So how much do you think Wild Wild West died on its own merits or lack of merits? And how much do you think the world killed Wild Wild West?
By the way, Wild Wild West worldwide did $250 million, did $250 million, and made money. It was not a great movie. There are some good scenes in it. I think Most of the problem was that the movie wasn't good enough for the reasons we talked about. I will say there were two producers that were in trouble at Warner Brothers. The two biggest producers were John Peters and Joel Silver. Both had had a series of flops, and both were in trouble. John was doing Wild Wild West, and Joel Silver was doing Matrix, which was a really good movie. But Joel Silver, I believe, helped sabotage Wild Wild West by calling certain press people and telling them that Wild Wild West was in trouble, that we were over budget, that it was a bad movie. So that didn't help us, because once you get that ball rolling, it feeds on itself. And I remember Patrick Goldsmith. Yeah.
Do you know this? I mean, do you have any? I mean, is this just a suspicion?
It's a suspicion.
Do you know for a fact?
It's a suspicion. But Joel, I think, if he knew how good Matrix was going to be, might have not had to do it. But I believe Joel did it.
So you were the victim of like an internecine battle between egotistical producers.
I was a victim of not making a better movie.
Yeah. There's this quote that you once said, and maybe see if you can remember the quote. What did you once say about Brian Grazer?
I said Brian Grazer was an idiot savant without the savant part.
Now, who did you tell that to?
Premiere Magazine.
And what did you mean by that?
It was a joke.
Come on, that's not a joke. That's not a joke. You don't say.
I thought it was really
It's a great
funny
line. It is a funny line, but it's not a joke.
Brian Grazer is a really good producer. He's a really good producer. The thing about Brian, and since the time I worked with him, which was on my second film called For Love or Money with Michael J. Fox, and what I learned since then is, and then I was going to work with him on Fun with Dick and Jane with Jim Carrey until I quit. But what I learned is there are certain producers, because at one point I said to Brian, you got to pick a side. You either got to say to me, do what Jim Carrey says. This is on Fun with Dick and Jane. Or you have to say to Jim, do what Barry says. But you got to tell us what you think. And Brian's response is, what do you think? And Brian says, I don't know what I think until I know who's winning the argument. And I now learn that he's sort of right about that there are certain producers that don't want to engage, don't want to make anyone feel that they're not getting what they want until they sort of figure out who's winning. And that's the side.
That's the ultimate sort of political mood, isn't it? Political move.
Yeah, it's a political move, and some of the really good producers don't want to engage, don't want anyone to be angry at them, and sort of wait to see. Bill Barr recently said, history is written by the victor. And that's so creepy, but it's definitely a way to be. And so at the time when I said he's an idiot savant without the savant part, it was really, I thought, a really, really funny line. So
it's a hilarious line, but I mean, since you don't live in LA, you don't have to sort of run into him at Le Dome or wherever. Do you ever get an opportunity? Does he ever call up and say, "Hey Barry, I read that line. What did you mean by that?" Did you ever get to explain? And can you talk your way out of something like that?
Well, this is pre-email. He sent me a fax that said, "Dear Barry, fuck you." So I called him. I called him at Imagine, and I said, if I had meant it, if I had felt that way, do you think I would actually have said it? Oh. And he said, you're right. I accept your apology. So we left it at that.
This is the opening scene from the recent Netflix show, A Series of Unfortunate Events. Patrick Warburton plays the narrator, Lemony Snicket, and he's in a dark sewer illuminated only by the match he lights.
The story will be dreadful, melancholy, and calamitous. A word which here means dreadful and melancholy. That is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the Baudelaires.
I have to say, I think, I like a lot of your movies. I think probably your finest work might be one of your most recent things, which is A Series of Unfortunate Events. I think it's, just in terms of a show made for kids that's not only enjoyable for adults, it's hilarious. The show on Netflix. It's 3 seasons. It was 2017. And if nobody's seen it by now and you have kids who are, I don't know, I think it's appropriate for kids who are probably 7 to 13. It is amazing. And the thing about this show, and I watched the end of it, which is just, it's like devastating, the end of the show. Not in a way that's going to upset kids, but it is very, very emotional. This is a story, as I think a lot of people know. It was written by Daniel Handler, who goes by Lemony Snicket. And it's about kids whose parents perish in a fire, and they're taken in by Count Olaf, who is unredeemably evil. And I thought about, did this story particularly appeal to you because of the way you grew up?
Absolutely. I loved the books. I read them to my daughter. When I heard that Scott Rudin owned the rights to the movie, I convinced him to hire me as a director of the feature film until Scott left and other producers came in. And
we should note, let me stop you for a second. There was, I'm sure people remember this, but there was a previous version. I think it might have been as far back as like 2004,
with
starring
Jim Carrey.
With Jim Carrey, that I assumed probably would end the idea that anybody would ever make it, because it was a flop and it wasn't a particularly good film. But anyway, you were at one point going to direct it, correct?
Right. So that didn't happen. And then I heard years later, Jimmy Miller, who's a big-time manager in Hollywood, called me and said, "Hey, Barr, Netflix bought the rights to the books. Paramount let the rights expire." And I got into Netflix and spent 2.5 hours and said, I literally sat there with Cindy Holland and Brian Wright and Teddy Biasilli, and I said, here's why you should hire me. I know exactly how to do this movie. I want to shoot it all on stage in Vancouver. I want Lemony Snicket to be an on-camera narrator. I told them exactly what I was going to do. And when you see the show, it's exactly what I pitched that day. And here's why I loved it so much. The books and our show posit that all children are capable and wonderful, and all adults, whether they're villains or well-meaning, are equally horrific and ineffectual. And for me, those books were autobiographical. It's exactly the way I felt about children and adults. And I'm glad you liked it, because I think it's the best work I've ever done, including Men in Black and Get Shorty and all that stuff. It's totally a storybook in film form. I am most proud of the 3 years that I executive produced and was a showrunner and directed 40% of the episodes. I'm so proud of it.
Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. I'm sure it'll be out in paperback soon. I have enjoyed your work, and I've enjoyed having you so much on the show. Barry, thank you.
It's a pleasure. I loved your questions.
That's the episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this interview with Barry Sonnenfeld as much as I did, please subscribe, rate it highly, and recommend it to maybe 50 of your friends. I want to thank LA Magazine, including, of course, editor Mayor Rashan. You should subscribe at lamag.com, and you will receive a clean, COVID-free copy of the magazine in your mail every month. This episode was produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, and brand new father, Rob Heath. Can you believe it? We made it through. Congrats to Rob and Ruthie Ackerman on the birth of their daughter Clementine Olive Heathman. It's a great name, an ingenious melding of two names. Clementine, I'm sure, any day now will have her own Babyhood in the Era of COVID podcast debuting soon. Big thanks also to Sasha Irwin, who was kind enough to introduce me to her stepdad, Barry Sonnenfeld. Now, Sasha is an amazing portrait photographer. If you're in the market for a portrait photographer on the East Coast, check out her work and hire her. She's at sashairwit.com. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.